I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video will be on determinism and free will. So there has been a lot of question and thought, pontification, and speculation, and just outright claims by many people within the fields of neuroscience, affective neuroscience, and cognitive science on the item and psychologists, on the and biologists, and even some very notable writers, philosophers, and physicists on the item of determinism and free will. And very really the material vantage point to the world, as in the scientific body of facts and explanation for why things are the way that they are in terms of the makeup of the human mind and neuro phenomenon and dynamics, would show that there is far more that is fixed and determined about human experience than is readily apparent, and that there is no such thing as the self, and there is no such thing as free will. That is the stance that so many people have taken, and people have come up in arms about this very really because, one, it disavows the subjectivity of experience, and it is very much catastrophic to existential proclivities that one has in terms of them being a personality that may be geared towards meaning or valuing themselves as individuals. So there's a lot of ways that this can be divisive, per se, to one's worldview. And science is not here to pander towards one's feelings, but I do think that very really that in some ways science has gotten out of kilter in some respects, as it has taken a collection of incomplete facts, and it will always do this to get together the facts and the constellation of facts that it currently possesses to have the greatest stance of what's most likely occurring in the world. But it's this general position that I think is the problem. The real aspect and validity in determinism is that this is a material world governed by inanimate, unpersonal forces. If you are a materialist, it is very really, that is the world that we're living in, and that everything has a material makeup and comes down to the comprisement of matters. Though this, and so atoms are they're just items and objects. They do not have minds, and they are every electron is like the other electron. Every positron is like another positron. If they're not like the previous positron and electron, they're not an electron or a positron. It's just that every proton is like the other proton that's out in the universe. Every photon is like every other photon that's out in the universe, and the same laws and the same dynamics of interaction that they have with the base fields in terms of the electromagnetic spectrums and the gravitational field, or the weak force or the strong force or the Higgs field, is the same for all of them. There is no differentiation other than the base differentiation that comes in their spin and in their masses and various other properties that atoms can be, or fundamental particles can be described with. So it is this sense that everything that exists at the foundation of existence, or the material world, really is not, there is no freedom whatsoever that's going on there, as in they do not determine or act or choose things for themselves, but are completely at the, well, it's not even at the mercy, because they are not personal agencies with emotive qualities nor personas. They don't have experiences. They just simply are, and are acted upon and act upon one another, and those actions and dynamics create the world that we see. And those actions and those dynamics are at the basis of what we are as individuals, and there's a constellation and a stratum that appears of complexity that sums up from the atom to the cell to the organ to the organelle to the organism, and that's what we're looking at when we're looking at ourselves. Now the thing is that people take and make the leap from the base structures being like this to the entire grand structure is made like this. And there's other reasons for this. That's just the base conception of materialism by way, of determinism by way of materialism. Then there is the biological materialism, as we are subjects of evolution, and very really that we have instinctual patterns that exist in us that we are subject to, as we really don't choose if we're there is a degree of variability, and there's an interplay with the environment by way of the individual's actions and choices and the environment that they're reared in. But nature selects, then the specific community that we're in selects for things, and then the individual expresses themselves out of that. So there is not this picture of complete dynamism, dynamism and choice in that, and from the individual's vantage point, that very really no one got to pick how tall they were, no one got to pick their IQ, no one got to pick their levels of attractiveness, no one ever got to pick their eye color. I mean, you can augment some of these things by plastic surgery, but very really you're not changing a lot of these things, and these things say so much about how you see the world and how you experience life very really. And some of them are irreconcilable, as in you will not ever be able to do much about them, and that is the position in the world that we're living in. So it seems, and when people conceptualize this subjugative quality, I would say, about life, as in we're subjective to things outside of our own volition, they described it as fate, and the Stoics said that all that existed was fate. And Shakespeare wasn't too far from the Stoic thought and philosophy, and he very much, a lot of, or the will of God, or whatever, just that, and it was even the rectification for various irreconcilable elements. There was a point in time where determinism was considered to be a very good thing, but it's really because we're living in the West and we value the individual so much that determinism tends to be a contentious element for us. But in other systems and philosophies of thought, you won't need this rectification, or I wouldn't even have to do this investigation for my own self. But moving on, it's to say this, that there is the aspects of biological determinism, and then within that complex of biological determinism, there is cognitive determinism, as in that the frontier of neuroscientific research has shown us that it is the impulse of electrons and biochemical electric material traveling through substrates, and the communication of astrocytes, just nodes of oligodendrocytes that exist in the brain. It's the communication and propagation of waves and electrochemical impulses that really create the phenomenon of activity in the human body. So when we move, what we are, what we think, and things of that nature is to the helm and the devices of material agencies and physical forces like everything else. The laws of physics act in our body and they act on us. Not only that our conscious mind is only but one description of the level of the individual, and as it was hinted before or alluded to, or one could extrapolate or infer from the biological determinism, there is a subconscious mind, and there's a mind that makes choices for us that we don't get to make, and that are underpinning the choices that we do make in some respects, and what we're interested in some ways, and a lot of things. So there is just this deterministic swell that is around the individual that they might find themselves being drowned in. Now, some constellation I would like to give to the individual is that that's just what seems to be the thing, because in some respects, that is somewhat of the truth. So I want to say this, that is somewhat of the truth. There is an aspect of life that is deterministic. There really is. But I think that we have this very false dichotomy in a lot of ways between determinism and will and volition. And I will get to that. But there is one thing I would like to critique on the materialist, is that it's a fallacy of division, assuming that the parts are like the whole, as in that self-organizing systems, which is what the brain is, cannot be understood in its complexity from the parsimonied and local levels of analyses. It is very finite, not finite, but infinite and infinitesimally small items of action and interaction that make the appearance of what we're looking at when we're observing any one phenomenon. We have become clever as scientists in picking out certain modalities and frameworks of resolution to look at, but there is even a greater one that only seems simple to us, because we cannot ever look at the brain in its totality and the smallest senses. We can't look at everything going on when we're observing one singular phenomenon. So when we're observing, it's the observer's paradox, or really the rule of uncertainty. Just when you focus in on certain aspects, you will discredit and not be able to get at everything else that's going on in the system at any one time. And we cannot make out, because the brain is so complex. There is too much going on at one time, and in one instance, for us to be able to see everything that is leading to an experience. It's to say this, that is a fallacy of division. You cannot assume that what's going on in the localized parts is true and descriptive of the whole in its integration. How the thing acts when it's integrated and moving throughout the day-to-day experience is only something we can extrapolate and infer, but we can't really make that out. It's hard. Neuroscience is a very, very difficult frontier, and we're going to need new mathematics and things for it, because very really it's hard to get at the entity as using the entity to observe itself. That may sound like a convoluted and confusing statement, but a computer cannot know its own processes. A computer can describe the processes that sit at its centers of language that it is made to convey to the programmer or whatever, but it can't know itself. There's a level to where it can't know itself, and it can't diagnose its ailments and things of that nature, to where that's where people need to come in and open it up and see what's going on. But there's nothing outside of us to do that for ourselves, very really. That's not a part of the interface itself, as we're a bunch of brains looking at other brains. There's a real difficulty in that. But it's creating this fallacy of division that I don't think is appropriate. And you can't make a fallacy of totality and assuming that what's displayed, the totality of a thing, is like the parts. There's too much. It's a self-organizing system. There are too many dynamic aspects at play at any one point in time to be able to come to some absolute finitude of things. But I do think it is infinitely apparent that when we do take and analyze other organisms, that there are fixed and determined patterns of things. But I would like to say this, that what if that is not at all contradictory to the item of free will, but what if that is what you need to have free will? I would say this, that when we look at most organisms, that they have their neurophrenology and their complexes. Mammals have the neocortex, and we as primates have a greater specificity in our neocortex and our lateral frontality, as we have regions that are at the side and the front parts of our brain that don't exist in other primates, or only in a select species of primates and some orcas, that really give us the ability to have a will. And this is the thing, that is that possible if you do not have all of the great stringency and codification of innate factors? And very really, if you're starving and you can't meet certain needs and don't have a collection of processes and parameters for things to exist in, then you can't have any freedom. Freedom is interesting as in it can only exist in constraints. It's like the paradox of a genie, that you have this godlike force in this small contained lamp with tight constrictions and bounds to it that cannot be at all descriptive of the infinite magnitude that exists in the thing, yet it does exist in that thing. And that's a lot like free will and determinism. And people should look at it like two inverted pyramids, with determinism being at the bottom and the foundation, and free will being at the top like this, so their determinism tip here, free will tip. As free will emerges from determinism and sprouts out from that construction, that very really the innate biological aspects and qualities that make us organisms being stacked and founded upon the other evolutionary advancements and our cognitive ancestry and history have come together to create this prefrontal cortex, and the bilateral symmetry and the peculiar parsing between the corpus callosum and the lateral regions of our brain, and the very pronounced prefrontal cortex, even in respects to other organisms, that gives us the ability to inhibit, project, make metaphor, morality, constitute and collect all those things together to give us subjective experience, as in the subject is an emerging phenomena. The subject is not a definite phenomenon, as in I don't think you can localize it in any one part of the brain, but emergent phenomena like creativity is an emergent phenomenon. It doesn't exist in any one part of the brain, but the subject, the self, is an emergent property. And you can say that because it's an emergent property or something like that, that it doesn't really exist, but that's just the way you like to look at the world. But the self really does exist as an emergent something, as these things come together to constellate us and make up our experience. Our free will is within our determinism. The determinism is the agent that gives over the will. You need things accounted for, and you need a certain palette and construction of something to build other things up off of, as nature is conservative. So that's just how I conceptualize determinism and free will, as it's a false dichotomy, and one and one are the same things, and you can't have free will without determinism. Very really, as if you look at a dog doesn't have a lot of choice, but there's not a lot of complexity in terms of what a dog can necessarily do in the compartmentalization of patterns and action potentials in the environment, as they don't have a very sophisticated neurophrenology. They have a more sophisticated neurophrenology than other things, but they don't have one as much as us, and they have to consistently be trying to meet their base needs and things of that nature, but to where people have those things mapped out, and they're very definite and concretized, and we don't have to think about those things, and we have a very robust subconscious and unconscious mind to handle those things, so we don't have to handle them, so that we have freedom to have will. It is our enslavement that gives us freedom, and we should not. I think that very really the future will show us, and an analysis will show us, that free will and determinism are the same things in one way. That you need one here to have this up here, and it's a structure and a building process and an emergent phenomenon and self-organizing, like so many things in nature, but it's fairly complex and is going to need a great deal of more explanation. But so those are my thoughts, and that's my video, and hopefully you found it interesting.